Most people who find themselves in the personal development and self-help world are at heart nice people. Or at the very least identify with being nice. Pleasant, reasonable, non-confrontational. They're also fundamentally growth-seeking beings. But here's where a core struggle presents itself. A built-in push-pull dynamic. Good-hearted, nice people tend to be wired to do everything in their power to reduce discomfort in others and in themselves, one way or another. And yet they seek growth, and discomfort is intrinsic to the growth of us as beautiful, brilliant humans. It's a cause of so much confusion, frustration, and limitation. So what can we do about it? Well, in today's episode, we're looking discomfort in the eye, at the myths, at the mistaken strategies, at a simple solution that resolves the paradox and helps us become more aligned so we can step confidently forward on our path. Welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. If you're looking to improve your life, to heal, to grow, and mature as an individual, but maybe you found that some of the personal development and consciousness stuff has given you the impression that you need to be super serious and vigilant to get anywhere meaningful, or feeling like maybe you're just not up to snuff. Well, this show is here to remind you of your humanity, and in fact that's where your true joy and brilliance lies. With over 25 years of experience in the transformation biz and having developed MPA, one of the world's simplest, pressure-free approaches to growth and well-being, if I do say so myself, I'll be sharing tips, steps, and insights that'll help you navigate all the aspects of life as a growth-seeking being. On this show, it comes to you with a good dose of humour, maybe a smattering of colourful language, a reminder not to take things so personally, and most importantly, to be kind to yourself along the way. Make sure you hit that follow button, and let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. I'm delighted that you're here. We are at episode number 125, which means you can find the show notes if you go to www.beabrillianthuman.com/125. Now, if you're a regular, you'll know that I've had a week off. It's been my birthday. Woohoo! Another year older. I don't know if it's just me. I don't think it is. Do they get closer together? Is someone shrinking the timeline? I don't know. I can't believe I'm the age I am. I'm not saying what it is right now. If you want to find out, go on Facebook. Oh dear. But I tell you what, I don't know about you, but as I get older and I look through these eyes, I think it doesn't feel like I'm any older. I'm kind of like, you look in the mirror and you go, who's that? But really, it's like I still feel like I'm 20 years old. It's crazy. I do feel a lot of gratitude, though. One of the things about social media is there was a lot of love on Facebook. I suppose I've made it my business, as it is part of my business, to gather a lot of people that are, in quotes, friends, people I know, people I have connected with in some random way. And yet there's so much love comes on Facebook on a birthday. Loads of people saying happy birthday. And I had a break, hence I wasn't here last week. One of my passions, in case you didn't know, is wildlife photography, and we went away to Scotland and did some amazing photography of sparrowhawks and red kites and wonderful stuff like that. So I feel pretty rejuvenated this week. And this week, seemingly instantly getting into the paradox, we're talking about discomfort. Well, before we dive into the topic, I want to make a distinction because what I'm talking about today is really psychological discomfort, which is, in my opinion, quite different to physical discomfort or pain in particular. There is an argument where some of the things I'm going to talk about may be that the physical discomfort has come from prolonged avoidance of psychological or emotional discomfort and therefore has manifested in the body. That's a possibility. But really, when I'm talking about this discomfort, if you're someone who lives with physical pain, oh my God, you have my deepest sympathy. I think it's one of the most hard things to live with. In the times where I've never thankfully suffered with chronic pain. I've lived with someone who's had chronic pain, so I have at least some idea by proximity of the challenge of that. But in the times I have had sort of relatively prolonged periods of pain, it's one of the worst things. And so some of the things I'll be saying today, while there is a way you could apply them, I just wanted to make that distinction really, because if you're someone who's in that situation, you might go, well, it's easy for you to say, Joel. But I'm not pointing to that. So having made that distinction, let's talk about discomfort, because as I said in the intro, it's one of those things that is kind of a big paradox in our world, where we're growth-seeking beings and yet tend to be people who avoid discomfort. One of the things I said there is that people who tend to do this, and we're talking generalizations here, but most of the people that I've met as clients and peers in this industry and in the realm of this world generally they come to this caring profession or this place of world to kind of deal with the discomfort that they've experienced. And often they've grown up as a child with a sense of needing to offset the discomfort in the household. A lot of the sort of personalities that are built are based on the idea of, I've talked a lot about, feeling like you don't matter, you're invisible, because being invisible for some of us was one of the easiest way to not add insult to injury in an otherwise very uncomfortable household. So today we're going to look at some of the myths around it and how we resolve that paradox, and look at some of the things that could be tricky, but ultimately a way forward, really. So without further ado, let's dive into episode 125 of the Be a Brilliant Human show. Now, one of the things that I alluded to in the intro is the idea that there's no growth without discomfort. Now, that might seem like a big statement. It might even sound to you like a bit of a hopeless statement. Oh no, why would I do it? But one of the things that we're going to talk about is that the whole idea of discomfort and that there's something bad and wrong about it. I would posit to you that there's a kind of a wonderfulness around discomfort. I'm not saying that it's necessarily always or can be pleasant, but it's certainly, and one of the things we'll talk about today is how you can transform your relationship to discomfort, which is kind of one of the keys. But I certainly have found that, when it comes to growth, usually there is some form of discomfort. It's natural, it's change. If you think of a classic metaphor like the butterfly or the dragonfly that has to sort of go through the whole chrysalis process, I doubt very much that that's a comfortable experience. But we often look at nature and we see it as this kind of somehow less dramatic or emotionally charged in these processes. But we don't know. And it's one of those things where, the idea of having to sort of break out of whether you're a chick breaking out of an egg, a butterfly breaking out of its chrysalis, or any of these things, there'll have been a period where, you've been sort of comfortable, even in birth, comfortable inside the womb to a certain degree, but the discomfort of being too big for the womb is something which becomes, we sort of instinctively know it's time, and then it's time to come out, and the birthing process, whether it's chrysalis, an egg, or a baby coming out of a womb, is not something that is comfortable. Now, if you're a woman who's had a baby, you say, yeah, tell me about it, right? But you get the point. It's like, these are all points of growth, of transformation. And in the world where you're looking to improve yourself, to polish your personality, mature, to heal, to overcome past traumas, there's kind of inevitably in that transformation process going to be some form of discomfort. Now, the flip side of that is when we kind of get stuck. If we find the discomfort too hard or difficult, we'll often set ourselves these comfort zones. And comfort zones, in many ways, are the death of growth. It's one of the biggest stopping points that we have is we hit a comfort zone. Now, I'm not intrinsically anti-comfort zone. I think there's a time to sort of plateau and take a pause and a rest. I'm not into macho growth for the sake of growth to meet some personal growth target that gives you a badge. It's not what I'm talking about here, but there is a way that we can sometimes use our comfort zones as a way to limit ourselves. I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about the strategies we use to sort of to back up our limiting stories in that way. And also there's a way that sort of discomfort often comes when there's a boundary or an edge, really. Maybe I should call it an edge. Like if you have a learning curve, and there'll be a time where if you're going to learn something new, there's going to be a period where there's going to be a sense of incompetency. Now, for some people, incompetency is like a nightmare. That's a really uncomfortable feeling like you don't know what you're doing. And yet, if you're learning anything, you're going to inevitably have to walk through that unknown place, that sense of incompetence. It's a natural part of learning. So often we'll hit a boundary, a growth boundary really, which is like the edge of that comfort zone, right? Where there's going to be that point where there's discomfort of some kind. Now, the thing about being discomfort averse is it tends to give birth to kind of one of the biggest mistakes, or really a myth about discomfort. And it's the idea of fixing discomfort. In other words, to get rid of it. And this is a big error. That's a strong statement. In my opinion, it's my perspective. I see it in all sorts of areas where we have this idea of fixing and getting rid of things that are actually have their place, that are useful. And normally it's that discomfort with the discomfort that means we're inspired to get rid of it. To somehow eradicate. We can eradicate discomfort from the world. Well, actually, I don't think we want to do that. And what really happens, in fact, I don't think it's even possible to do that, because discomfort is part of life. It's one of the signals in life. But what happens when you go down that path, when you sort of buy the myth, when you make this mistake, you end up in a never-ending circle, because you tried to get rid of the discomfort, and then because it's part of life, it's inevitably going to come back and haunt you in some way. Whether it's the same discomfort from one situation or another situation, if you fundamentally have this sort of sponsoring idea inside you that you can somehow get rid of discomfort or avoid it completely, then it just goes round in circles, and you end up then building feelings of failure because you're not meeting your ridiculous goals of ridding the world or yourself of discomfort. And normally, it leads to some kind of avoidance of discomfort. And that's where you get the stasis. That's where you start keeping yourself small. Because each time you try and get rid of it, you fail, it goes on in a circle, then you try and get rid of that, which then fails, then you try and get rid of the next one. It's like ever decreasing circles. Keeps going round and round, and until you just end up wondering why life has no meaning, and you don't achieve anything, and much as part of you says you want to grow, you don't seem to manage to punch through that paper bag of limitation that seems to stand in your way. That's why I'm talking about the push-pull energy, because we have these two instincts inside of us. Or if you have the discomfort with the discomfort, then chances are this is going to be part of your experience in day-to-day life. And there's subtle ways, well, subtle in one sense because we tend to hide them from ourselves, but they're not really that subtle. But there's ways that we do this. There's ways that we attempt to avoid the discomfort. So I want to go through a couple of the core ones, or the main ones that I see. Now, the first strategy I see as an avoidance strategy of experiencing discomfort is positive thinking. Now, I know if you've listened to this show a lot, you might be thinking, Joel, you always give positive thinking a hard time. But I'm not really giving the essence of positive thinking a hard time. It's the confusion and misuse of it that gets my goat. So, I'm really fundamentally a very positive person. I'm definitely a glass half full. I do believe it's very powerful to direct your attention to the positive, or to what brings you more peace or more joy. It's just that I see that people can take this positive thinking idea almost like a religion and use it like a weapon against themselves to dismiss or deny what's actually happening. That's the piece of the equation where I like to sort of really point out the distinction, because we do this kind of thing not because we mean to, we're just not really fully aware of how we're using these things. I mean, most positive tools that you have available are equally capable of being used in for self-harm. Positive thinking is just like that. So when it comes to the avoidance strategies or avoiding discomfort, a lot of folk get confused by this positive thinking vibe because they miss that the happiness, the peace, or the comfort is eternally available. And the fact that it is doesn't mean that life is without discomfort in our outward experience. And that's the thing, really. It's like positive thinking is probably the weapon of choice for those that want to get rid of the discomfort. But you can have incredible positive thinking. You can be very positive minded and still embrace the presence of discomfort. You can still acknowledge the discomfort or the difficulties in your life and still be very positive. These things are not mutually exclusive. I think that's the myth that gets people, is that if you say ouch and in some more elaborate form, but if you say ouch and then someone says, oh, I can't, that's the wrong thing to say, I need to phrase it positively in some, I don't know how you rephrase ouch positively. Oh, my body is challenged. No, it's an ouch. Because in saying ouch, it's just an honest expression. It moves through, and you can still go ouch, and I'm getting better, or or find some positive reason around it. But when you use positive thinking to literally dismiss or deny what's going on, that's where you start pushing things into an unhelpful space, shall we say. And the other, probably more obvious one that we use to avoid the discomfort, or certainly in the area of comfort zones where we become avoidant of the discomfort of going through an edge or limitation, is we have fear. And what we do with fear is we rationalize it. We create a logical story to justify and back up our fears that will avoid, ultimately the idea underneath it is that avoids the discomfort. Because why? Second sponsoring thought, discomfort is bad, it's painful, I don't want it, I don't like it. We avoid pain, we avoid discomfort. We're all about the positive thinking, we're all about positivity and joy and love and light. Very one-sided. And it's tricky because the way we rationalize our fear is, and a rationalized fear, when you're not being real, what's that really? That's a lie, But the best lies are based on some kind of truth, and that's what we do to ourselves. But the thing is, just like most lies, we know deep down, if someone lies to you, somewhere deep inside, you know it, you can feel it. There's an energetic mismatch in what's being said, and that's especially true of the lies that we tell ourselves. And of course, the irony of that is, how do we know that we're lying to ourselves? It's uncomfortable. There's discomfort. So we use these, rationalizing our fears, which are lies, in order to avoid the discomfort, which by its very nature creates discomfort. Here we are in these ever-decreasing circles of hopeless denial. And what we end up doing, of course, is we really push discomfort into our deeper recesses. It doesn't really go away. And here's the thing, I've kind of touched on it earlier in this, but if you start thinking about discomfort as being part of life, then you can get into the idea that it's a signal, it's a mechanism of life, it's feedback. Discomfort, if you think about it in terms of the comfort zone, you're at an edge. This is a good thing, It's like it's something which gives you feedback, the same as, I started off talking about a distinction about it not being pain, but pain in a sense is feedback. The nervous system gives us pain. Discomfort is a psychological feedback that there's growth to be had. And if you take that to the pain thing, trust me, you don't want to be in a body that has no capacity to let you know when it's in pain. I often say, what's that called? That's called leprosy. it's horrible because people lose limbs because they've got no feedback to tell them what's actually happening in the world, or in themselves. And so the idea of sort of, again, getting rid of discomfort is getting rid of a fundamental and really powerful mechanism of feedback within your life. Now, while I'm talking about this, I want to make a distinction here. I'm not suggesting that, so you don't have any of these rationalizations, or you don't use any positive thinking, or more to the point, what I'm not saying is that you should force yourself through the edges before you're ready. That's a way to bust a fuse. That's why I said there's a place for comfort zones. There's a time and a place for everything. Everything has its season. But when you're kind of get really clear and honest with yourself, you'll be able to feel the difference when the timing of really addressing any of the lies that you told yourself, or just being willing to face a discomfort, versus when, it's actually the kindest thing to let it be. And when either of those is either a lie or a truth, that's the technique, really. That's the approach to take, is coming to that honest discernment of whether each of those is actually true in the moment, because there's contexts where each of them could be true. I know in my life there's times where it's been like, I know I've got an issue, I know it's going to be uncomfortable, but I also know that if I try and force my way through it now, it's going to be off on some other level. And there's times I've lied to myself with exactly the same story. Oh yeah, I'm not, I know I've got an issue, but it's probably not that much of an issue. And if I force myself, then that would be busting a fuse. Now, same words, different energy, right? We've all done it. So that's one of the keys, is really to sort of start to become really aware of what's the difference between when you're telling yourself porky pies, that's rhyming slang for those who are not in the UK for all lies, and when you're being genuinely honest with yourself, and what's going to be truly kind to you. And that's not always an easy thing. So what's the solution then? How can we resolve this? Joel, you promised to tell us how. Well, it's quite simple, really. It's kind of a trick, but the answer is very simply to get comfortable with the discomfort. I've often said that finding the inner place of comfort with the discomfort, or to sort of use similar things like feeling at peace with the war, having a sense of forgiveness for the inability to forgive, it's a very different energy. It's a non-personal energy. It's like a sense of getting a little bit wider with what's there. But what it does is, as distinct from trying to eradicate negative experience, is it shifts your relationship to an experience that is ultimately going to be part of life. So getting comfortable with the discomfort means that you're more at peace with the presence of it. Now, there's an interesting and weird thing that happens when you do that. When you fight discomfort, what happens? It makes it worse. It gets more uncomfortable. There's more stress in the system. When you're comfortable with the discomfort, then there's a relaxation. And if you think about when you relax with something, when you become comfortable with something, energetically and probably physically, and certainly psychologically, there's a sense of creating more space, more openness, which allows that discomfort to flow through with less friction. Because that resistance is what creates friction. The friction creates stuckness and pressures and all those things that end up causing us harm in some form. So, in a sense, the practice of becoming comfortable with the discomfort is a practice which it really encourages you to embrace yourself, sort of to rest kind of almost divinely or sacredly in your wholeness, because wholeness is about including all the parts of us that show up as human. And, with regards to growth, and I talked about this before, is like discomfort as an edge, it's a boundary. One of the ways that I talk about it is a signal. So I talk about it as a mechanism of life, as a signal. So if you have discomfort, this is a sort of a mental trick you can do to become more comfortable with the discomfort, is go, yay. Hey, let's lean into that positive thinking. Yay, it's a signal. The difference there is it doesn't dismiss the discomfort. It just goes, there's discomfort. Now I can lean into the fact that it's a signal that I'm at an edge, exciting things to go. It says you're onto something, you're about to grow. The other thing I want to say here is that, there's an adjustment here, because if you've been someone who has habitually avoided discomfort, it's easy for me to say just become comfortable with the discomfort, but it does mean facing the lies or untruths that you've been telling yourself. And it means an adjustment, because you're going from sort of hiding and muting yourself to speaking your truth, and that can seem brutal initially, internally, but also with others. It's like the classic yanking off of a plaster, and that takes courage, a good deal of self-love and self-respect to really go there. And in those terms, I say it can seem brutal initially, but it can also to yourself, but also discomfort isn't just internal. I mean, one of the biggest challenges is becoming comfortable with the discomfort in others. I mentioned earlier, often we grew up with discomfort in our households. If we're generally discomfort averse, and we've trained ourselves to do what we can to mute or help. We call it helping the discomfort of others. But if we're really honest, at times it's because we're uncomfortable with their discomfort, so we're going to mute them. In a nice way, obviously we do it in a nice way. But that discomfort in others can be a big issue, and especially when our growth means that we have to have difficult conversations in relationships. When you stop lying to yourself, you're going to stop lying to others in the same way. Now, I know something like, I don't lie to myself. Call it a nicer name then. It's untruths, where we've been in denial or whatever. The fact is that once you wake up to it, you're going to start communicating things differently. With the boundary work I do comes to mind. So in my program, Boundary Bootcamp, which is all about going from people that have poor or even no boundaries and suffer terribly from it. And if you go to the website, you can go to, let me remember it, www.thempacademy.com/boundary-bootcamp. I'll put it in the show notes as well. And watch the video. It really points to the pain that comes from having no boundaries. But one of the things that I see in boundary work is that what people without boundaries don't realize is that they're living out of truth, because they're not honoring their boundaries. So their partners often don't really know who they are, because they've said yes to things when they mean no. And one of the things that I highlight in Boundary Bootcamp is that it's a matter of practice to express and navigate these things in the most graceful ways, because things generally get messy as you begin, this process of uncovering the lies and then speaking what is the truth. And it gets messy because, the fact is, even when you've mastered the art of communicating these things, even then there's no guarantee that it's going to be received with grace, because while you can provide the best opportunity for it over time, and again, the program in part goes into what happens when you've discovered your boundaries and then you have to communicate them. That's a big part of the program. But you're never truly in control, and there's going to be ripples. There's going to be uncomfortable ripples. These people that you've been saying yes when you mean no are going to be a bit surprised and taken aback if you start saying, well, actually, that's not okay now. They'll be, what's happened to you? You've changed. It's a tricky situation. And, but here's the thing. When the ripples of that, the discomfort of that subsides, you and those you've spoken your truth with are going to be a lot clearer and have a lot, have the truth. You're going to have the truth of each other much more once you've done that. So the decisions about your relationship will come from a more kind of authentic place. But what we find is the tendency to feel terrible or guilty or responsible, which is so understandable, when the response to your speaking up gets messy, when people get triggered and hurt or feel betrayed because, what you're now expressing doesn't fit the model of you that they've had in their mind or you've given them in mind, or it conflicts with their own ideals. After all, these are the very patterns that hold us in fear of being true, but it gets messy and they get upset, and then we end up feeling guilty. Oh, I should never have spoken my truth, or that doesn't work. These are the things that shore up the comfort zones. And the challenge when navigating, the tricky territory of this is moving from discomfort with the discomfort to being comfortable with the discomfort, whether it's yours or whether it's theirs. Understand that even in a relationship, if you hit that discomfort, and I'm speaking specifically to discomfort that comes out of speaking a deeper truth in relationship, you're coming to an edge. There's a boundary. You're usually setting a boundary in the context of this part of the conversation. But anywhere where you're speaking your truth in relationship that hasn't been spoken before, it's a gateway. It's an opportunity for growth. Now, I'm not going to say there aren't times when people do boundary work and they find that relationships end because when they discover who they are and they get an unhealthy response from a partner who really needs them to be the old way, where they're compliant and docile and those kind of things, that can go either way. But there's equally, if not more, relationships that I've heard of where things transform wildly in a positive way. Because I've heard things like, finally you've showed up, or there you are. Oh my God, I love this new you. And because it sets us all free when we start speaking our truth, when we face the discomfort of going through that doorway, there's more honesty, more truth. And from that, there comes more intimacy, more closeness, more realness. Because usually a lot of these dynamics, certainly relationally, there's a co-creation there. Often it's not just one person that's not speaking their truth, it's both. There are occasions where someone's just happy to dominate and one's happy to be submissive, or at least not really happy, but that's the dynamic. All the time it's when someone steps up and says, look, this is the real me. I've been saying yes when I mean no. Those kind of things. It gives permission to the person to be more real, and then you get to sort that shit out, and what's been a stale relationship becomes vibrant and alive and more honest and true, and two people living their life, I'd say living their best life, it's a bit of a cliche, but living the truth of their life, but in togetherness, rather than living a muted version of themselves in togetherness, both being sort of quietly miserable and saying yes when they mean no. So, so if you encounter resistance or a messy response when you're speaking your truth, assuming you've done your best to communicate as kindly and clearly as possible and appropriate, I encourage you to realize that feeling bad or guilty or responsible for their response is a misplaced response to that, and you can remind yourself that the decision to speak your truth or set a boundary or come from a genuine commitment to a deeper authenticity and honoring of you or your own values and the freedom to be yourself. That's what it's about. And by courageously offering it, when you become comfortable with the discomfort, or at least willing to go through the discomfort, you gift those very things, you not only to yourself but to the other person. So hopefully I've given you pause for thought. If you're someone who's discomfort averse, if I was to sort of wrap it up into a few simple sentences for you to take away with you, the key here is to become comfortable with the discomfort, which means changing your relationship to it. If the blocks in there are about the myth that you can get rid of it, that's going to be a stumbling block right there. Understand that discomfort is a feedback mechanism that's not going to go away any more than pain, or so there's so many signals in our lives, and I love to think about things as signals. It helps with that shift of relationship. And also to really encourage you to be very discerning, to practice that art of discernment. It's one of the things that I'm so passionate, it's so key to that sort of sense of noticing the nuances, the subtle differences, what's the distinction between things that seem like they're the same but are different. So that story that could work either way, is it the truth to yourself, or is that a little white lie or a big fat lie to yourself? Start becoming sort of sensitive to the difference. Start becoming more honest. And in that, in a sense, it will give you a chance to experience discomfort, I imagine. But the more you can become aware that it's a signal, it's okay to feel discomfort. In fact, it could be a really good thing. It could become your friend, that signal that says, here's an opportunity. If you do that, then you're going to take the brakes off your growth. You're going to create that relaxation, that space for things to move through. Because blocked discomfort lasts a hell of a lot longer than allowed discomfort. Again, going back to that metaphor of ripping off a plaster, you can do it slowly and painfully. Or whack. Yeah, that hurt. But it's kind of gone. It's kind of done. So that's my encouragement to you today. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. Do let me know. You can get hold of me by the usual ways on social media. As ever, you can come onto Facebook. Find me at MPA Rocks. Just search MPA Rocks. Or find my personal profile, which is Joel Young MPA. In fact, on Instagram and Twitter, I'm also at Joel Young MPA. I'm even checking in on LinkedIn once in a while these days. So, you can have a look there as well. So I hope you enjoyed the show. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you soon. Thanks so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this show, I'd love you to do me a solid and tell someone about it. They can find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and most other podcast platforms. Plus, if you visit the website, www.BABrillianthuman.com, you can share the show notes to social media and make my day. Also, make sure you hit that follow button, and if you haven't yet downloaded the MPA process sheet, head on over to joelyoungmpa.com and get your free copy today. Big love, and see you next time.